Welcome to the HCI family of podcasts. We're your source for personal, professional, and organizational growth and development. We share our own original research, explore industry trends, and interview executives and thought leaders from across the globe. Join us for practitioner-oriented content around all things leadership, HR, talent management, organizational development, and change management. Maximize your personal and organizational potential with the HCI family of podcasts. Jim Frawley, welcome to the conversation today.
Thank you for having me.
It's a real pleasure to be with you. Today, we're going to be talking about change management, organizational development, and really how things are changing rapidly in the modern workplace, and how HR leaders and leaders in general can adapt to that change. As we get started, I wanted to share Jim's bio with everybody. Jim Frawley is an expert in change management, organizational development, and founder of Bellwether Method. Jim is a renowned keynote speaker, the host of Jim's Take, the podcast, a big-time reader, small-time triathlete, and a full-time father and husband. And I know that really only scratches the surface of your background and expertise, but I'm thrilled to have a chance to sit down with you today and have this conversation. Anything you would like to highlight before we dive on in?
No, it's an exciting time and the work is tons of fun. And, I love talking about this stuff.
Awesome. Let me start with kind of your general way of framing up change. There's lots of change models out there, lots of folks who speak on the topic, and I think in my experience, everyone tends to kind of have their own flavor. So what's your flavor of change management?
My big focus, and this was my first book, was called Adapting in Motion, Finding Your Place in the New Economy. And it was all about how do you prepare for change when you don't know what change is coming.
Yeah.
And it was based largely in my work in corporate. I was working in the financial industry and executive communications during the financial crisis. So massive amounts of change in a very abrupt period of time. And I had tremendous access to the C-suite, luckily, and you could see the executives who did it very, very well and the executives who did not. And I see a lot of the similar parameters today with AI and the massive changes that are coming. There's the uncertainty and the volatility and the complexity, that whole VUCA environment. And so now what I've put together based on my experience in corporate and my 10 years having the consulting business is there are really four components that executives today need to have in order to be a successful executive amid so much change.
Awesome. Yeah, and we're going to dig into those. And you're absolutely right. I think the pandemic was a really great opportunity to see what leaders were made of. And some really rose to the challenge, and many did not. And many were able to adapt, and many were not able to adapt. And we're in a similar, different obviously, but a similar type of disruption currently with machine learning, AI, and how that's really transforming the way work is designed, the way we interact with each other, the way we produce, and all of that. And I tend to see, one of, probably a small handful of kind of buckets of how people tend to respond to these things. And on the one hand, you have, if you think of it on a spectrum, perhaps you have those who are fully embracing it, leaning into it. But you equally have those that are doing like return to office mandates, and they're like trying to, clamp down on more control amidst the uncertainty, and everything in between. And obviously it depends on the industry, it depends on the company, the types of jobs you're talking about, as to whether those types of things make sense. But the reality is, a lot of what I see, when those types of mandates are made, is just a reaction to uncertainty, a reaction to change, a discomfort with the ambiguity of it all, and trying to seize some semblance of normalcy and control. Anyways, there's a whole lot here to chat about, but I think we certainly, as you highlighted, we live in an interesting time. It's harder than ever. I think being a good leader amidst the complexity, amidst the ambiguity of the work environment and how things are changing so rapidly, it's not for the faint of heart. It's a hard thing, and we expect so much of our leaders, and it's harder than ever. So I look forward to unpacking those four areas with you as we go throughout the conversation. A little bit more generally to start, with all of these rapid changes, do you see anything in particular in relation to HR professionals and how they're managing successfully, leading, and adapting to change?
Yeah, I think it's all executives, regardless of function, have a similar kind of parameter in which to respond to. But now more than ever, these successful HR executives are not just thinking forward, but they're actual partners to the business, and they have to insert themselves into the business. And you just don't see that in a lot of organizations where they're more of just a cost center, and HR is here because we have to have you. And so when you can find an HR professional who understands the business, that's like the big focus there. So for HR people, yeah, we could talk about change. We could talk about you as an individual and the social needs and the philosophy and the communication components. But at the end of the day, you have to be able to provide value to the business from an HR perspective and understand the business so you can match their needs, whether it's from people development right on through staffing, through compensation, through
Yeah.
everything else.
Yeah. Bringing value to the market is ultimately what you're there for, right? It's why businesses and organizations exist. And having HR as a clear business partner within the organization as opposed to a cost center is essential. And there's been a shift that direction, but the most progressive organizations have already moved that way.
Yeah.
Others are in the midst of moving that way. But you're right. Like I think the vast majority of organizations, they're not there, and they still, HR is still just kind of this compliance arm, this cost
Hmm.
center. It's not being leveraged in a real strategic way, and that's, I suppose it's kind of, there's dual blame to be had there.
Hmm.
The HR professionals need to be doing more to play the game the right way. Leaders, executive C-suite folks need to expect more out of their HR folks and have it maybe a different
Yeah.
perspective on it. But ultimately, yeah, you have to be able to demonstrate how you can add value to the organization in real terms. And that's something I just think a lot of, traditional HR folks who have been in the industry for a really long time, on average, I just don't think they do it all that well. And I think that leads into one piece that you were mentioning, and that is communication. So
Yeah.
you need to be able to effectively communicate. You need to have a clear vision. Say you're the CHRO or a senior HR leader in your organization, you need to have that business partner mindset, and you need to understand the business, and you need to be able to communicate in terms of the most important metrics to the business. But you need to be able to communicate that downstream too, right? You need
Yeah.
everyone on your team. And if you're in a large organization, you're going to have a large HR team with lots of different specialty functions, and everyone needs to understand how they plug in and why they're important. And that's not an easy thing to do, especially if you kind of are in that more kind of old school traditional organizational environment, with a traditional mindset around HR, to start to make that culture shift, and to drive that change. How have you seen that effectively happen, when it has happened? How do they communicate that change effectively and get it downstream, lateral, upstream, everything?
Yeah, a lot of the work I do on communications is it starts with just a basic fundamental communication model, right? Which most people don't understand how communication works from a basic model perspective, and it's a process. And just because you're sending a message does not mean that your particular audience is receiving the message that you wish to
Right.
have. It's impacted
Yeah.
by medium, it's impacted by context, it's your context and their context, and so when you break down, I guess the just the function of communication, you can then get into the details of, all right, how do we structure communication properly? One is, these are the things they need to know, but then how are they going to receive it? And it's going to be the same message, but you've got multiple audiences, clients, shareholders, associates, whomever it is. That same message has to be packaged according to the person receiving it. If you're communicating to the C-suite versus communicating to the front line, there's themes throughout it and similar information, but the audience is so different in that it needs to accommodate both of those. And most people, when they're structuring communications, that's their big challenge, is they don't have a full understanding of how the communication is going to be received. And we're living in a world of 150 characters and everything else and blasting out. And most people don't put the time in to say, how is this message going to be received? And the ones who do that are the ones who are incredibly successful with their communications.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting that you look at any, like, go Google communication model and like images that pop up, like any basic communication model is going
Yeah.
to have, it's going to highlight exactly what you just said, right? Like the sender and the receiver, and there's noise and there's things that mess up the communication. And so we often so much just think about whatever our message is. We don't think about the mindset, the context that the receiver happens to be in, and we don't tailor or get that message in such a way that they can hear it, that they will hear it, and that they can do something with it. I mean that I think everyone probably who's in the audience is like, yep, yep, they've had experience with that. They know what we're talking about. Yet we fall into that same trap over and over and over again. I don't know if it's laziness. I don't know, we're just all hectic and busy and just trying to, like, okay, I'm just going to send out this email and I'm going to send it to everyone, even though different stakeholders need it, communicated in different ways. Like, I'm not sure what the reason is, but I think most people know that they need to pay attention to that, and yet we do so badly at it.
And it is a major differentiator. I mean, especially with the email, the old saying, sorry, I sent you a long email. I didn't have time to write you a short one. But it's, the people who are intentional with their emails and they don't send emails unless they actually have something to say. I mean, it's a differentiator. People notice when you're very direct and your ability to get things done based on the clarity of your communication and matching it to that audience. It's a big one today.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Well, let's dig into each of the four that you
Yeah.
mentioned. Yeah, lay those out for us.
All right. So understanding the arc of change. I mean, right now, I would say the four components that are most relevant for executives. One is communication. That's the one we just covered. So you have to know how to communicate, understand how communication works. But then the other three, I would say one is this idea of adapting emotion. How do you build your adaptability? How do you prepare for change when you don't know what change is coming? That's kind of got a physical, a mental, and a social component to it on how you're thinking about change and building your capacity to adapt. So that's one. Two is the ability to be social has now just become a component of the compass, if you will. Everything now amid AI is social and not the online. It's in-person social interaction is what you need as an executive. And then the true north that I always end with is philosophy. How do you build an executive philosophy? What do you believe? What is your belief system? What are these components that are driving your decisions? Because when your runway ends, it's that philosophy that tells you which direction to go and where to make the right choices and the big changes.
Yeah, so having clarity around, having a clear vision and having clarity around your values and how that's going to guide what you're doing is really, really important. Which is kind of how I'm understanding what you're talking about in terms of philosophy. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
not though. Maybe there's something slightly different how you're thinking about that. But I think ultimately we absolutely need to have that clarity, or we're going to flounder, and you're going to have people who, and we all know, I mean, we probably are like this at times too, but like we all know folks who don't really lead. They just kind of like run around like chickens with their heads cut off, putting out fires every day. Um,
Yeah.
and that's not really even good management, let alone leadership. And you're certainly not going to be able to respond to change in any, positive way when that's kind of your approach. And so having that North Star, that you're pointing towards and being able to realign to, is really important.
Yeah, it's most of the time we think that we're operating under a set of truths, but there really is nothing that's true, right? Beliefs are not truths, and a belief can change. And when you recognize that your beliefs can and should change over time based on your experiences, your interactions, and everything else, you then ask very different questions, which allows this curiosity, opens the discussion door to get more and more people sharing their perspectives and offering their beliefs and everything from what's your belief on people management, what do you believe, what do you believe is the greatest baseball team or whatever, right? They're all beliefs, they're all the same, but most people don't take the time to articulate what they actually believe. I sit and I operate under 6 core beliefs that is pretty it goes over everything that I do. So basically any challenge I have probably ties to one of those beliefs and how I'm supposed to respond to it. So it's a lot of work now with senior executives of writing their belief belief statement and having their, this is how I like to work. This is how I like to receive information. This is what I believe about people development. This is what I believe leadership means. Leadership's an emotional component. It's not, everybody's got a different definition of what leadership is. And so that's a form of belief. So articulating what those beliefs are grounds you in a way to have very different conversations with the team and the rest of the organization.
Yeah, yeah. So would you mind sharing with us what those six are for you?
Oh, sure. The first one is there are no rules. So that's been my, I guess, moniker since launching the business 10 years ago. There are no rules, and there's nothing that can't be done. So those are two things that kind of, if I want to do something, I'm going to do it. So those two kind of bucket in there. And the idea of rules, I'm not very friendly in a corporate environment. So it's I'm very hostile to authority. So that's that. Then I went based on an individual.
Maybe that you're well suited in a consulting role.
That's right. That's right. Leave me out. And right,
I tend the
do.
same direction.
Yeah. Nobody tells me what to do. Then it's there's always room for one more is another belief. That was something growing up. No matter who showed up at the house, knocked on the door, a pot of tea went on, and there was one piece of cake got chopped up into little bits, and community is very, very important. So there's always room for one more. I believe I had to throw a religious one in here, even though I'm not very religious, but I do believe that heaven and hell exist, but I don't believe that they exist after you die. I believe they're states of being and where you actually are, and I think there's an authenticity component to that. And then my wrapper on beliefs is this too shall pass. No matter what challenge we are faced with, whether it's a recession, whether it's AI, whether it's losing a job, this moment will pass, right? Time is a very very interesting thing if you sit and think about, technically the future doesn't exist and the past doesn't exist. All you have is this present moment kind of thing. So this too shall pass is my big philosophical one.
Mm-hmm. And I like the heaven and hell observation, regardless of faith tradition, religious background,
Yeah.
any beliefs that someone may have, we all create, our reality and we all create our own kind of positive or negative environment. So, we could be living in heaven or living in hell at this very moment, depending on how we approach
Right.
life. And yeah, and I think that's a really powerful thing. Like we do have control over it. Everyone has stuff. Like everyone has garbage in their lives, garbage in their background, challenging things, hard things, and some more than others, but everyone has stuff, and everyone, has to wake up every day and decide how they're going to respond to it and
Yeah.
make a choice. I think in personal life that's certainly true, in family life, whatever. But in an organizational setting, yeah, organizations are messy, people are messy, and you get groups of people together to do something together, and it's messy. And so
Hmm.
I don't care if it's the best organization in the world with the best leaders, it's still going to be messy and it's still going to be hard. And you can either be a curmudgeon about it and just kind of be miserable, or you can you can kind of choose how you're going to frame that in your mind. You can choose how you approach it and try to have more of a heaven versus hell kind of mentality.
Right.
Obviously, sometimes a situation's bad. You need to get out of it. Like some
Hmm.
organizations, some leaders are toxic, and staying there is not going to suit you well. But a lot of times, we really do have power over that. We have power over how we perceive it, how we interact with it, and how we respond to it, and that can make all the difference in the world for folks.
Yeah, I mean, especially there are no rules, right? You can do whatever the hell. We're adults. We can do whatever the hell we want. It's pretty nice. Now, of course, we have bills and all that other stuff, but we still could do really. In theory, we could do whatever we want.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so as we start to wrap up for today, one of the things you've alluded to, we've talked about the AI stuff that's transforming how work is designed, and just placement is all the rage. Everyone's talking about it. Certainly, there are layoffs or just not replacing folks as they leave, and so natural attrition. And how organizations are responding to that. Like there's all this around recruiting and labor force. thoughts on like how to navigate that, especially if you're a leader trying to like calm the masses, like keep your teams functioning, but they're freaking out that they're going to get displaced, or they just heard either at your company in another area, or maybe at just a different company, but they just hear about layoffs all the time. They hear about displacement all the time, and they're just scared about it.
Yeah, it's, that's usually why people bring me in, is because they don't want to tell people. They want someone like me to tell people, to talk about the change and get them going that way. But as there's two components to that. One is objectively the whole discussion on whether or not we need people or what people we need in an organization is fundamentally changing. Like, if you look at like the marketing department, you say, do we really need 50 people in the marketing department? What could we do with 10? Right. And that's the way the conversation's going, because people are generally the biggest expense. So I would say it's not that leaders even have to say now, everybody knows it. So it's like the big elephant in the room. I will say, and this makes me very unpopular, but I will say we've been talking about AI for 2 years now, and the massive change and everything else. If you haven't started doing something to recession proof you or to get you in a better position, at a certain point, it's on you. If you're not networking, if you're not, trying to make some kind of change and take a look at those things. And some people still haven't gotten the message. I've spoken to people who've gotten laid off, and they say, I just didn't realize how irrelevant I became. And
Mm.
relevance is the watchword for the future. And I think people, ultimately you lie in the bed you make. I do think organizations have an absolute, almost ethical obligation to prepare their people for it and get them set up and do these things. These people have given you their lives and done all these things, but you can't rely on an organization to do that, unfortunately. So and it's really up to an individual to start getting out networking, making sure you've got people in your social circle, and doing all of those typical types of things to prepare. Because when layoffs happen, and they will, by doing that work in advance, you are light years ahead of everybody else. And then you're going to have a network in place. You're going to have people that that you can call. You're not scrambling to go to a networking event with your resume in your hand. Those people don't do well at networking events. So do it now while you're gainfully employed and doing all these types of things. And that's where I would tell people to focus next.
Yeah, recession proofing yourself, AI proofing yourself, just any
Yeah.
disruption proofing yourself.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know exactly what's going to be happening in the future. But like you said, with AI, well, we're a couple years into this disruption. We kind of know what's coming, even though we don't know exactly. And I agree. I mean, I wish every organization was just more proactive about investing in their people and reskilling and
Yeah.
upskilling folks. I mean, it's to their benefit to do that, but the reality is, you can't count on that. Like as an individual,
Yeah.
I have to take ownership over my own situation, and so we have to make sure that we're proactively, developing the resiliency muscle and the adaptability, muscle, and doing the things that we need to so that we can leverage these new tools, rather than being displaced by them, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
and ultimately, there's going to be a whole lot more pain where that came from, before we get this all figured out. And so I think everyone needs to pay close attention to that. Well, Jim, this has just been a really great conversation. I know we've only scratched the surface here. There's so much more to say, but I appreciate you taking the time, sitting down with me, and having this dialogue around this. As we wrap up, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you and find out more about your work, and then give us a final word for today.
Yeah, everything's on jimfrawley.com. I've got socials, but I hate socials. I don't even know what my handles are. So just go to jimfrawley.com and you could find all that kind of stuff. And the book is Adapting in Motion. An upcoming book is called Understanding Why: Building an Executive Philosophy. So that'll be hitting bookshelves soon.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Jim. It's been a pleasure. I encourage the audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Jim can do for you. Check out the books, check out the resources on his website. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe. They can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day. And I hope you all have a great week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the podcast. We hope you stay healthy and safe, and please join us again soon.